How to tell if you have a narcissistic sibling. I have a narcissistic sister, and for the longest time, I didn't know this. So, here's a bit of a backstory to how now I am able to identify that my sister is a narcissist. My sister is a bully. My sister is mean. My sister is a jealous person. She's negative. She's toxic. And it's so sad for me to say all those horrible things about my sister and find it hard to say good things about her. But I'm at a point where I'm finding it hard to say good things about her because for the longest time I justified her actions. And I am actually the type of person who tries to see the good in people. I always try to see the good in people. Even when people behave badly, I always try to even make a justification for their bad behavior. Maybe they were hurt, maybe they're going through something. I try my best to look for the good in people, but I'm at a point as I've discovered that my sister is a narcissist, my mother is a narcissist. I've talked about my mother a lot in previous episodes, but I thought in this episode I should talk about having a narcissistic sibling, specifically in my case, having a narcissistic sister. So let's take it back all the way to our childhood. So growing up, one of the earliest memories I have was me being very angry as a child. And my anger was, at the time, for me, confusingly directed towards my sister. There was one time where I sort of like lifted her off the ground with my hands, grabbing her by the cheeks. There was a time, I think there have been times where I kind of had like this physical behavior towards my sister. Some things that my mother would tell me, some things that I don't even remember because of maybe I was too young. But I had a lot of anger, but it seemed to have manifested towards my sister. And there was a time when we were young, we used to fight a lot, but it seemed kind of normal because siblings fight and all of that. But looking back at those fights and how defenseless and angry I would get, I'm surprised that when I grew older, I actually didn't become a physically abusive, I suppose, abusive person or someone who deals with issues by physically handling someone. So, that memory I do have of lifting my sister off the ground, grabbing her cheeks. And during those times when I would get angry at my sister, I didn't know exactly what would get to me about her. Even me having that memory of me grabbing her by the cheeks and lifting her off the ground, I don't even know why I was angry. I don't even know why I was doing that. I don't remember what she had done or said that made me so angry. I just remember always being angry, especially towards my sister. Now I look back and I realize that my sister is a very extroverted person. She's social. She's likable. People like her. People are drawn to her. And looking back now as an adult, I now see that I was I was angry and even sometimes took it out on her, maybe physically. And it didn't happen like a lot of times. Maybe it happened like 2 or 3 times where I like maybe physically did something to my sister. I never really hit her. I don't remember hitting her. But I think there have been like 1 or 2 times where my mother has said I would do this or that to my sister. I simply remember this incident where I lifted her off the ground by the cheeks. Now I look back and see that my sister has this very overpowering personality, and it's not necessarily her personality that's overpowering. She likes to be overpowering. And I didn't know that as a child. I now see that I was angry because I'm a reserved person, and as a child, I was very, very shy. I never knew how to express myself verbally. And almost like any child, because as a child, you are still relatively new in this world, right? As a child, you still need to be taught and guided as to how you should deal with your emotions, how you should manage, how you should react, how you should respond to certain things. And so, because I was shy, reserved, introverted, I think the only way I could respond was just being angry at her and perhaps even just doing something physical to her. That's the only way, because she was great at talking. Like my sister is, she's a spectacular emotional verbal abuser. Like she's great at doing that. And looking back now as an adult, and not to justify what I would do to her physically in any way, that was wrong on my part. But I'm learning to forgive the child who did that. And I think maybe if we ever get to a healthy place where my sister and I can really talk about these things and talk about our childhood and how we both experienced it, I think I owe my sister an apology for that. And the reason I say I would only apologize in a circumstance where we are free and able and like in a space where we can really talk about this. It's that right now, I can't apologize to her because she is a narcissist for one, but my sister is also just kind of like she lives in her own world where she doesn't really do anything wrong. She doesn't really see anything wrong with anything that she does. I think for me, I would have to apologize. And this sounds crazy because it sounds as if I'm not taking accountability. I'm not humbling myself enough to apologize to her for what I did to her as a child. But I would only apologize for what I did as a child. To her, I would only apologize once we are in a space where she's able to understand how she also affected me. Like my actions were wrong and they are not to be justified, but I would need, for me, that's what I need. I need only to apologize to my sister for what I did to her when she's in a space where she could understand what she also did to me, where we can both acknowledge where we were wrong. But because my sister is a narcissist, and one of the top traits of being a narcissist is that they never admit to being wrong, they never admit to doing anything wrong. And so at this point, I'm not willing to give that apology. I'm really, really not. And maybe it's immature, but I'm not. And I'm going with that. And for the longest time, because I was raised by a narcissist who confused me emotionally and was emotionally unstable, for the longest time I questioned how I made decisions and all of that. And this time around, I'm just no longer gonna do that. Right now, I don't want to apologize to my sister. I'm not gonna apologize until, if possible, we get to a stage where she could also acknowledge how she treated me as a child. And so from that experience, from that time on, I think it was like a phase where like I would physically take out my anger at my sister. And then from there on, I was just angry. I would be moody. I would be defensive. That's how I handled the abuse that I got, not only from my sister, but from my mother, the emotional abuse, psychological abuse. So I was just angry. I was moody. I was the moodiest person in the world because that was the only way I knew how to deal with my emotions. Which, in as much as it was unfair to them that I was this moody person, they were never sure if they did something wrong or they could talk to me. At the same time, it was a coping mechanism for their own actions. Like, I don't want this to sound like I'm justifying my own bad behavior, but some of the bad and unhealthy and toxic behaviors we have, it's because of how other people treated us or of certain circumstances. What I'm teaching myself now is to no longer be that moody, angry. I mean, I think like from my 20s, I just really got better. I think after I left home, I got better with like being moody, being angry, and all of that. But I'm teaching myself for the sake of others who will get to know me in the future or who know me now to no longer be that person. But when it comes to my family, I think I'm still at a point where I am kind of still justifying why I was the way I was because they were the way they were. They were abusive. And so once I got out of that little phase of just like physically doing something to my sister. I never really hurt her like to a point where like she was bruised or injured, but I just would sort of like do some physical stuff, you know. So once I got off, oh, the rain, it's raining, I hope you can still hear me. Once I got off that phase of just physically doing something to her, I was just angry and moody, and my sister continued on to bully me. The subject of bullying is usually hard to explain to other people when it's not physical bullying. People expect to, like when you're in school, it's someone who takes your lunch money. It's someone who, like, I don't know, like wants your schoolwork, takes your homework from you, forces you to write homework for them. Like there's like just this almost tangible physical abuse or bullying. But for my sister was never physical with me. I don't remember my sister ever being physical with me. I was the only one who was physical with her. She was never physical with me, but Lord, I think her being physical would have been much better because her words scarred me. Like my sister in our childhood, she was the one who pointed the most all of my physical imperfections. Like I have dark knees. I believe they call like pigmented. Is it? I think like that's the term that's used. But I have like really dark knees and I'm a light skinned person. So I have like really dark knees. She would constantly point that out. I was very skinny growing up. She would constantly point that out and even compare me to other people and say like, but you are skinnier, like when comparing me to other people. And she would make fun of like my butt. I had a very flat butt because I was skinny. She would make fun of my flat butt. She would point out every physical imperfection or flaw about me. And sometimes I would just laugh along. Sometimes I would just get upset and keep it to myself and never really say anything. And because sometimes my mother would join in some of these things, like saying I'm skinny. I've mentioned a couple of times about like my ugly toes. They would point out like, you have ugly toes. And all of those things really, really affected my confidence because when you were a child, when you are a teenager, you already got that going on, like in school. Like I remember vividly in my street, like the kids used to constantly point out that I was skinny. I really didn't need that coming from my family because there were already people outside who were pointing that out about me. I didn't need that coming from my family. So I had to be bullied by my family and then bullied by other people outside of my family. So that was not great. That was the worst experience ever. And growing up, one of the main things that I always noticed but never really took note of was the fact that my sister was my mom's favorite. Like, I was the child who did her chores to perfection, the child who came back straight from school to home, the child who always did it. Like, I feel like I was the teacher's pet. Like I was my mother's pet. Like, the child who always tried to do. And I think like my sister also hated me for that, even though she never really said it or could never admit it because she could never really be that vulnerable. Like I think my sister hated me for the fact that, I did things perfectly. Like I was the perfect child in a way. Because I've always been afraid of being scolded. I've always been afraid of being punished. And so I did those things just like to stay in my mother's good books. And like I've said in previous episodes, I was kind of like fighting for my mother's love because my mother loved my sister That was just obvious. I always justified it that my mother loved my sister more as like, I never said that my mother loved my sister more because I didn't really put it like that at the time, but I always thought of it as the fact that my sister is extroverted, and so my mother kind of like related more to my sister because, she was the entertainer. Even when the adults are around, the elders are around, like aunts and everybody, like she was the one who could just like talk to them almost like she was their age, because my sister was just really comfortable with adults and was entertaining and was funny. So I always thought that's why my mother preferred my sister, because she was the socialite, she was talkative, I was shy, I was reserved. Even if I did come out to be with everybody or in a gathering, I still wouldn't like entertain, I wouldn't really talk, I would just keep to myself. And so I always justified it like, okay, that's why my mother like prefers my sister over me. And I think that was the main reason that actually turned my sister into a narcissist. I think my mother made my sister a narcissist. Firstly, me and my sister we were always going to be influenced by my mother's narcissistic tendencies, because whatever you grew up with at home, even if it was physically abusive, somehow you are bound to adopt certain traits because that's what you used to, that's what you grew up with, and in a way it sort of like became normal to you. This is why we sometimes see men who go on to abuse their wives because their fathers abused their mother, and in a way it just became normal to them that this is how you treat someone. And so even if my mother hadn't made my sister the golden child, I think that would have also contributed to her being a narcissist. And I also have some narcissistic traits. I've mentioned some of them in my previous episodes, like the fact that when you are a narcissist, you don't want criticism. Like, even if it's constructive, you don't really want to be judged because believe it or not, we are all bound to be judged at one point in our lives or not. Whether you are judged because of your personality or you are judged because of your work. I mean, at work, there are literally work reviews and evaluations. So you're basically being judged, like, how's your work? How are you doing your work? And so for me, one of the narcissistic traits is that I hated to be criticized or corrected or have my flaws pointed out. And I think it's because I've had my flaws, my imperfections pointed out to me so much by my mother and my sister that I just hated, even if it was constructive, even if it was much needed. And if you are the type of person who hates to be corrected or criticized, or to be let known that, okay, you could do this better, you can do this way, or you didn't do this perfectly, or you did it wrong, then you are never going to be someone who grows and improves. Because if people constantly tell you that you are doing everything great, it means at some point somebody's lying. Some people are lying, because nobody's perfect and you can never do everything right perfectly, get it right all the time. And so there are certain narcissistic traits that I now even just look back and see in myself that, oh, that was actually part of being like a narcissist. I'm not a narcissist. And one of the ways that I've figured this out, through the videos I've watched from Dr. Ramini, Renika's podcast, was that like a narcissist wouldn't be as introspective as I am. They wouldn't dig into these things like, why am I the way I am, or what things I've done wrong. They wouldn't even admit the fact that I'm admitting that I hate constructive, or I hated, I'm getting better now, I hated criticism, even constructive criticism. Like, a narcissist could never get to a point where they are aware of these things and they can admit these things. They can admit where they fall short, or where they were wrong, or where they could improve. So that's how I know I'm not a narcissist. But I do know that there are some narcissistic tendencies that I've adopted because I lived with a narcissist. Okay, yeah. So going back to, like, my mother actually made my sister a narcissist because she made her the special one, like the one who's just like, you're great because you entertain people. Like, you're great because you make people laugh. You're great because you, like, there are even instances where I look back and I see that my mother was much more comfortable with complimenting my sister at times, like not all the time, because my mother is still a narcissist, even if like she loved my sister more, but she would still be a narcissist even towards her, like bring her down, make her feel small, like all of the things that I experienced, my sister has also experienced, like from my mother. But at times, she was much more comfortable complimenting my sister than complimenting me. Like saying she's beautiful. Like my mother always just had great things to say, like about my sister, especially like about her physical appearance. Like her hands are beautiful. Like even my sister till this day, she always says this, like she has beautiful hands. Like my sister umekahle. This is like a really big thing, like within the black community. Like bayathanda ukuncomana ngokuma kahle. So like having like saying that she has a beautiful body shape, she was much more comfortable. I don't remember my mother ever complimenting me physically. Like I just don't. Like as a child, I don't remember my mother ever giving me that boost of confidence in terms of like embracing and accepting my body size and my body shape and my physical traits. I really, really believe my mother made my sister a narcissist. So, one of the things that you could look out for or just really go back to and look back at when you think or realize that your sister or brother or your sibling is a narcissist, look at how your mother was towards that child. Most likely, the reason that they are entitled, the reason that they think they are super special, the reason that they think they're all that, or even the reason why they bullied you and belittled you. Look at how your mother, your parents, how they treated that child. For me now, I see that my sister is the way she is because of my mother. My sister would treat me the way she would treat me and like point out my flaws because that's how my mother treated me, and my sister treated me the same way. And like what always like blows my mind is that with narcissists, it doesn't matter how kind you are to them. Like I made it a point, like for myself, even as a child, like I never pointed out their flaws. And even in cases where I did, or I said something mean, or I pointed out their flaws, it was out of anger. It was almost like a revenge comment for me, more than me actually just wanting to point it out. Like, if ever I said something maybe about my sister's physique or something about her personality, it was more so out of just pain and bitterness and revenge because they always throw these things at me. But even in times where I said those things, I, they are way fewer than the number of times they have, my family, my sister, my mother, than the number of times they have put me down. Far less. Far, far less. So the main way that you can tell that your sibling is a narcissist is looking at how your mother, your father parented that sibling. They're probably maybe lenient towards that child. Maybe they just laughed at. I think my mother kind of lived through my sister because my sister can sing and my mother loves singing, and I think she she would have wanted to like be like a worshiper at church or something like that. And so she just kind of like lived through my sister, which in a way affected my sister's confidence because, like I said, my sister has suffered the same suffering that I suffered when it comes to my mother being a narcissist. And it even got to a point where my sister was affected in her confidence in singing. But the reason I don't sympathize with my sister, and it's only now that I'm starting to not sympathize, is because she turned out to be the very same abusive person that my mother was to us. I hope that she still has time to change. One of the most heartbreaking things that you hear whenever you read about narcissism or you hear about narcissism is that they are little to no chances of them changing. And that's because they are not introspective people. That's because they can never really look inward and see what's wrong with them and admit their actions. There've been a number of times where like I would address something with my sister, like in times where maybe she said something that I didn't like. She would never really acknowledge the fact that she was wrong or she hurt me, which gives me little hope even for my sister, young as she is, because for my mother I've lost all hope. Like, listen, it would be the miracle of God for my mother to change. And I read something painful where someone commented in a video about narcissism saying that you have to be careful with your mother when you have children, because narcissistic mothers, they become narcissistic grandmas. And that just really shook me, because I wouldn't want my child to go through the same thing that I went through, where my mother will be pointing out flaws and imperfections about my child, making her insecure. Like, I don't want that, because like I'm going to try to build my child's confidence and self-esteem, and I don't want her, when she comes to visit grandma points out the fact that, hey, like, you're really fat. And it's never in this, when like they say it, it's never in this like malice way. It's said like, oh, it's a joke, like, oh, stula sami, oh, you little fatty, like it's a joke, like we should all laugh. But no, like, you are destroying someone's confidence. Just because you're saying it and you're saying it in a joking manner doesn't mean it doesn't affect that person. And I think about that my sister, like, and then I turned that comment and said, like, narcissistic sisters become narcissistic aunts. That also popped in my mind, like, okay, so I have a narcissistic mother who's most likely going to be a narcissistic grandma. And I also have a narcissistic sister who's most likely going to become a narcissistic aunt. Like like my child is going to have this emotionally abusive grandmother and this emotionally abusive aunt, I mean. Like, I even feel for my sister's children. Like, I know there's nothing I can do about that, but I feel for my sister's children, because she's going to tear them apart and she's not even going to know that she's doing it. And they're not going to know for the longest time, because like that's what they're going to grow up with. Like, their mother, either, this is what I predict is going to happen to my sister's children. She's either going to make them think or believe that they are so special, so beautiful. Like, listen, there's nothing wrong with making your child believe that she's beautiful, she's smart, she's great. That is what parents should do. But then there's a line that is crossed when you make your child feel like she is just the star among the, like, the brightest star among stars. Like, it becomes unhealthy when your child thinks she is so special that she is above other people, like she's greater than other people. In my previous episode, I mentioned that my mother and my sister, they made me like downplay my greatness. And I said that, not greatness in the sense that I'm the greatest in the world, but greatness because we've all been created by God to have our own amount of greatness. So, yeah, you are great. Yeah, you are beautiful. Yeah, you are smart. Yeah, you are all this and that. But you are not like, oh, I'm so beautiful, like, more than others. Oh, I'm so smart, more than others. And yes, realistically speaking, you can be beautiful more than others. You can be smart more than others. But it's about not having that, like, over other people's heads. Like, other people just know that, okay, like, she wants us to know, like, she's the one. And I think that's what's going to happen with my sister's children. She's going to make them feel like they are all that, so much so that they're going to think they are better than other people. Like, producing other narcissists. I believe my sister's children are going to be narcissists, or they're going to be like me. They're going to be a victim. They're going to go on for the rest of their lives wondering why they doubt themselves so much, why they are so insecure, why they are so indecisive, why they can't really function in the world, because their mother, who is going to be my sister, would have destroyed their self-esteem, just like my mother did, just like my sister did.